Alrighty, folks, what's going on? This is Matt here for Dark One Next Thing Gamers, the fusion of Linux technology and gaming, and we are looking at another video about how to switch from Windows to Linux. This one is literally entitled as such. Again, I find the recommendations of these videos to either be good, bad, or indifferent. Um, Honestly, when it comes to a lot of these videos, I tend to actually prefer the ones where they're talking about their own personal switch to Linux, because that's the stuff that matters. That's the whole point of these videos, honestly, to me, is I enjoy hearing people's personal stories and experiences, good and bad. But sometimes the how tos and the why videos are, or why you should switch to Linux, how to switch to Linux. It's like kind of definitive statements tend to be questionable quality at best sometimes. So let's get into see what Homeboy here has to say, and hopefully it's good.
Are you thinking of making the switch from Windows to Linux? Maybe you're sick of Microsoft's weird practices, or the unreliability that Windows often brings these days. Whatever your reasons are, this video will be your guide to make your switch as smooth as possible.
So first thing I want to say is that any switch, unless he's talking about preparation, unless prepared for, it's not going to be smooth. Yeah, there's going to be rough patches. Doesn't matter what, but that's anything live, technology, tools, etc. Doesn't matter. So just keep that in mind. Let's see what he has for recommendations on preparations.
Before you install Linux on your computer, it's best to take some time to make a plan. Don't skip this step. The last thing you want is data loss or downtime, and your future self will thank you once your new Linux install is up and running. The first thing I suggest you do is figure out where, physically, you want to install Linux. Take stock of your computer's hardware. Do you have one system drive or multiple? If you have one, you'll likely be removing Windows and installing Linux as your sole operating system. If you have multiple drives, you might want to keep Windows on one drive and Linux on the other. This is called dual booting and allows you to select which operating system you want to boot with when you switch on your computer. In any case, back up all your important files, whether it's to an external hard drive or a cloud storage provider. Even if you won't be erasing your Windows drive, installing a new operating system carries risk, especially for novice users. Back up.
He's not wrong. Even on most Linux installers nowadays, it's like, are you sure you want to do this? It'll let you do it, but it's just like, are you sure, dum-dum? Because of particularly this reason. And a lot of Linux tools now, like if you, I think Etcher, if I remember correctly, at some point, like file, like disk space size comes into play, where it's like, hey, are you sure you want to burn this ISO to like this, insert, mount point here or drive point here? And it'll ask you, and it'll be like, 3 terabyte drive or whatever. So I do and totally get where he's coming from. So back up your files. Honestly, most end users aren't going to. Most general end users, they're not tech savvy. They don't care. They just want technology to work. Again, I always make the equivocal. It's like tools. They don't care if the tools are good or bad. They just want the tool for that point in that time, and let them get to the endpoint for the tool they need to get to that endpoint. That's all they care about. And that's like 99% of the population that uses fucking technology. But yes, generally back up your files.
Up your files. Another thing you could do is physically remove the Windows drive from your computer and purchase a new drive for Linux. That way, Windows and your files are safe, and you can install Linux on the new drive without as much risk.
So, double-edged. Sometimes it depends on the distro. Okay, so more portable, more laptop-y based systems, more of those kind of systems. It's a kind of sealed system. What you get is what you get as far as getting access to the drives and all that stuff. A lot of the times it's going to be a nuke and pave option. This is realistically what it is. I have a Microsoft Surface Book 2. I'm not going to get into the NVMe if I can, if I really, really want to, but repairability is a bitch. So it's relative to the system as far as the ability to remove the drive. Just making that point there. You can do external drives, et cetera, et cetera. There are different kind of ways to do that. I just want to be clear, if you're going to dual boot based on the same drive point, so like if you have one drive and you're going to still want to keep Windows in dual boot, Microsoft updates don't always play nice with other operating systems when it comes to the bootloader. So sometimes it'll not play nice at all. Also, sometimes if you do remove the not UEFI, NVMe drives or whatever drive you're using, sometimes it all depends on the distro. Secure boot, UEFI, and all that stuff can be a little wonky. You know, this isn't digitally signed and blah, blah, blah. As far as launching different OSs, I know I've run into that on a few different machines. So it's all kind of relative. Like this is the nitpicky, nitty gritty stuff that most people aren't going to tell you about. But I do like the fact that he is telling you to make preparations. Props there. Expound upon that a little bit, probably, because people are going to run into headaches that they aren't expecting, even on the initial part.
It's also in this stage that you'll want to take inventory of what applications you use on a day-to-day basis, and check whether they're supported natively on Linux. If so, that's great, but if not, you'll either need to find out whether you can run your program through a compatibility layer like Wine, or if you need to choose an alternative program.
Fucking okay. I love Wine. I love what Wine does. I love what is enabled. I love Proton. I love all that stuff. I'm not a native application first person. I don't care what the magic sauce that makes it fucking work as long as it works. All of that out of the way. If you are having someone help you make a switch, make the applications not fucking matter. Those alternatives, put them on the system that they're on already, because you're going to make the OS matter less to that person. I'm not saying the OS doesn't matter to that person from a perception point of view. It's going to matter less. So give the alternatives, and I do love the fact that it uses the term alternatives. Use those alternatives on, especially because most of the Linux apps are available on Windows. Most, not all. There's a few that I can name that aren't. But put those alternatives on Windows or their Mac OS system or whatever system they're on currently, and you're going to make the underlying OS matter less. Instead of the square peg round hole approach that is telling people to run their Windows apps on Linux. It doesn't work, generically speaking, what most people are going to use that for. So the alternatives on the primary OS that they're already familiar with, it makes the change less scary because you're like, oh, this is already on there. That's what you're still keeping them in their comfort level, because from an optics point of view, they are not seeing the change as much because they don't live in the OS like a lot of us do. They live in the applications, and that's what matters to them.
You might also want to check what bookmarks and passwords you need to save from your web browser. Most browsers will let you export bookmarks and passwords, which you can then transfer easily to your new browser on Linux. After you've made these preparations, depending on your levels of understanding, you might want to spend some time to learn a few concepts. For example, to understand that Windows programs are built and packaged differently to programs for Linux, you can't just launch an exe file in Linux and expect your program to install. Figure out how you'll get the software that you'll need. Maybe they're in your Linux distribution's App Center, or the software vendor may offer a Linux download on the website. Understand the different ways Linux software can be packaged. Maybe you're looking for a deb file or a Flatpak. Double check all these things before you go any further. At the time of
So this is why I use the term alternatives. This is where you rely on equivalencies. This is where similarities play a part, because while not always like from a technical point of view 100% accurate. Double click a deb and go through the process. That's when you tell them it's kind of similar to an exe. As far as like, it's kind of like Windows and it's kind of like a DMG and Mac. You double click on it and brings up an installer and you go through the install process. That's the part that they need to know. So give what the extension equivalency is and and the equivocal and equivalency to what they are used to and what it does. However, things like CardGZ and a Flatpak and all, like installing Flatpak, it's different for everything. I do like the fact Flatpak is not as obtuse as it used to be. I'm looking at you, over reliance on CLI and knowing long, stupid HTTPS addresses in order to actually, fucking install shit at one point. So props to that. If there was one thing we got from Snaps, it was at least a halfway sane CLI interface for Flatpak. But that being said, again, just give equivalencies to the people. Like, that's the biggest thing, is them understanding that it's different, but you can take some experiences and find similarities to it to point to. But again, alternative is not the same.
Making this video, my Linux catalog isn't very large, but I do plan to make more videos to support you. For the time being, Google and other YouTube videos are your friend. In general, I'd say that with the exception of Microsoft shenanigans, if you struggle to troubleshoot and resolve issues on Windows, you're not quite ready yet. But once you are comfortable and you've resolved any questions that you have, we can move on to the next step.
So, I don't know if I totally agree with that point. I think it's what people are just, if they, a lot of the non-techie, so like I'm speaking from a non-techie viewpoint when a lot of these, with just more of a technical knowledge on it, as far as like approach. I think most people aren't going to care. They just care if they have a support safety net. That's what they care about. They want a fucking phone number to call. That's what they care about. So if you give somebody, a piece of hardware and a thing that has, System 76 with Pop! OS or some type of like preload Ubuntu system from Dell or HP or, whatever, some insert company here, and they have a phone number they can call, they're not going to care. Again, they're going to use the tools on what's loaded on the machine, generically speaking. Most people aren't going to even reinstall a fucking OS, but to be totally real, there are some super non-technical people that I've seen do a lot of more technically inclined things than even people like me or other people that use Linux all the time are going to do, because they, researched and found it on their own. So again, it's relative to the user and how willing and open they are to some of the stuff. But again, I can only speak in generalities, and I'm generalizing when I speak about most people and their view of technology and how they view it. So again, it's more about kind of approach and how you get there. I am never going to tell somebody if they're not technically inclined to not switch, but I'm also going to not tell them to switch. So if they're content with the DOM on Windows or Mac OS or Linux or whatever OS they're on, let them be content with the DOM. That's their prerogative. I don't evangelize to people. I give people solutions to their potential technical problem. So that's what I prefer doing. And a lot of the problem is because there's that pragmatism and philosophical debate in Linux. You get a lot of the philosophical morons who like to evangelize. And no offense, y'all come across like the zealots that are the fucking Bible thumpers and they're, holy rollers and all the other nonsensical people that tell me I'm going to hell. And I just smile and say, already there. So for me, it's relative to the recommendations and stuff.
Go to your chosen Linux distro's website and download the installer. It'll come in the form of an ISO file, which is a disk image. We're going to be using Linux Mint for the purposes of this guide. Once your installer image has been downloaded, you need to write it to your USB stick. You can do this your own way, but I recommend using Balena Etcher, which is a free tool that has always worked for me. Select Flash from File and choose your installer ISO. Select your USB drive as the target and click Flash. Remember, this will erase your USB drive, so make sure any important files have been copied to somewhere safe. Once your USB drive is ready, we can go ahead and start installing Linux.
Okay, I just wanted to give him a chance to finish cooking before I said anything. I do like the fact that for once, for the love of God, when I watched one of these videos and it's not like, oh, just download an ISO and install the ISO to the USB and boot from the USB. And 90% of the fucking people never tell them how to actually boot from USB. So props to that. I will give that. Now that can be a big scary thing for some people. And again, something that I wish some people would kind of not gloss over because it is an important step. If you get a giant red flag that says you can't boot from this, device, disable secure boot. And again, I'm not saying you have to do it with all distros. I'm just saying it is a very big potential hurdle with how locked down Microsoft is getting with a lot of the hardware requirements for Windows now to install a third-party OS sometimes. So it is a potential hurdle and step that needs to be upfront about. And if it's upfront, it's a known entity. If it's a known entity, the solution is usually a lot simpler for people to find. And that's why I always kind of poo-poo on people who's like, oh, download the ISO and boot into the installer, and never mentioned that. But I do like the fact that he actually gave and showed an example of the UEFI settings and all, how to actually get into the shit. So props to that. Now, as far as VMs, I'm never going to recommend that, from most general end users aren't going to fucking know what the hell a VM is. An operating system inside of an operating system. They're not going to fucking know. They're not going to care. They're not going to do it. This is like telling a general end user who has no interest in technology, oh, just do GPU pass through and you can game on insert OS here. It's just so fucking stupid. That's not the right solution for the person. And, 90% of the generalized population that use fucking computers. But it is a possible solution. So I do say it is and recommend that people try it if you're in that level of use case and whatnot. Not everybody is, though, and most aren't. Most aren't going to jump through those fucking hurdles. And I haven't booted a VM in a long time because I'm more of a put it on metal kind of guy when it comes to OS installs. And I find VMs to be annoying most of the time. They don't give a great indication of real performance and real use cases, etc., because there generally tends to be within the framework of the VM, there tends to be usually some weird software stuff. I've tried Deepin and a few other Linux distros that are just this element doesn't work very well if it's VM, or like, oh, we're detecting a VM and X, Y, or Z, so we're going to like low graphics mode, etc. So again, I like the fact that you put that option out there. I like the fact it's made it known. I just don't like it from most end users because we casually lump it in as just use the VM. It's kind of like wine should be the last option, not the fucking first option. And same thing I say about Lutris. Lutris should be the last option, not the fucking first option when there are native options.
I'll go ahead and click Install Linux Mint. Eventually you'll get to a screen that asks where you'd like to install the operating system. Hopefully you've planned this already, and if you've backed up your files and want to replace Windows with Linux, you can choose the option that erases the entire disk and installs Linux Mint. If you're installing on another drive, you can select that too. Just make sure you don't select the wrong drive. Take your time and don't rush things. Again, a nice way to do this if you're keeping your Windows drive is just to unplug it while you install Mint. This reduces the risk a lot if you're unsure. After that, Mint will install. Follow the instructions and eventually you'll be asked to reboot. Now that you've rebooted into Linux Mint, it's over to you. Make yourself at home. You can start to copy over the files that you'll need, install your programs, and customize your desktop. Things will be in different places, but as I've said before, if you can read and look at icons, you already have the ability to navigate Linux Mint. It's pretty friendly. If you need support, there are always the Linux Mint forums. And you can check out my website, quinstechcorner.net, where I post guides that might help you. In the near future, I'll be making videos to guide you through what comes after the installation. For example, configuring Wine to emulate Windows programs, or maybe you want to emulate games from consoles. In any case, feel free to leave suggestions in the comments down below if you'd like me to answer a specific question. Thanks for watching this video, I hope it helped, and I'll catch you in the next one.
All right, so now I'm not gonna kind of rag on the post install stuff because there's steps in there. I'm not gonna rag on choice of distro, and I have my preferences like everybody else, but Linux Mint is fine for most people. Everyday users, they're gonna be fine with Mint. To make yourself at home, there's a few other steps that could lead to not having such a great time. Namely, driver installs, make sure your hardware works, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are steps after the install, I kind of wish you had covered, but generally the advice is generally speaking and pretty sound. There are a few little nuanced things that could throw a potential open-minded, new-ish to exploring technology type person. UEFI secure boot presenting a possible issue. He makes a recommendation of swapping out drives. Can't always do that with all systems, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a few nuanced things here and there that I can kind of pick at and bullshit about, but generally the advice is fairly sound. Again, I kind of wish the post install stuff was there because that's kind of relevant for a lot of people based on hardware. I know he's running AMD from what it looked like, so it's kind of irrelevant at that point because most of that shit's going to be baked in the kernel that you're going to use anyway. But if you're running a NVIDIA or you have like a Realtek chipset or Broadcom's not so much of an issue anymore, but there are things that, wireless drivers and drivers, like hardware drivers, etc., that should have probably been kind of mentioned in the process. Just my recommendation, but that's more of a content tweak than a full what the fuck. So generally I ain't got much really to bitch about as far as the overall presentation. Again, nuance, and sometimes even it's hard to always get all the nuance in a video sometimes. So other than that, let me know what you guys think. Was advice good, bad, indifferent? And you guys know what to do. Comment, rate, subscribe, and you got a Patreon, and all that crap is down below, as well as the original videos link and all that fun stuff. I will catch you guys on the flip.